The summer of 2026 began like any other. Millions of people around the world woke up, went to work, filled their cars with fuel and continued their daily lives without thinking about what was happening behind the scenes in the energy industry. For most drivers, gasoline was just gasoline. They rarely thought about its composition, production standards or the complex systems that allowed modern engines to run efficiently. But everything changed after one announcement. Late one evening, a short message appeared across several news platforms. It mentioned unexpected difficulties in the fuel industry and temporary changes that allowed older fuel production standards to return. Most people ignored it. To them, it was just another economic headline. But engineers immediately became concerned. Among them was Alex Morozov, an automotive specialist with more than 20 years of experience repairing engines and studying fuel systems. When he read the announcement, he remembered the changes that had happened years earlier. Back in 2013, the industry had moved away from older fuel standards and gradually adopted cleaner and more advanced requirements. The goal was to reduce harmful emissions and create better conditions for modern engines. At the time, it was considered a major technological step forward. Now, years later, it seemed like history was moving backward. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Gas stations continued operating, people continued driving, the roads remained full. But then the first reports started appearing. Drivers began sharing strange stories online. Some claimed their vehicles were running differently after refueling. Others reported increased fuel consumption. Some noticed warning lights appearing on their dashboards. At first, most people dismissed the reports. Just a bad fuel batch, many commented. Probably a maintenance issue, others said. But the number of complaints kept growing. Alex decided to pay attention. He started collecting information from repair shops across the country. Within days, he noticed a disturbing pattern. Many vehicles arriving at service centers had similar symptoms: engine instability, loss of power, electronic system errors, unusual fuel system behavior. The strange part was that these problems appeared in different regions at almost the same time. It was too organized to ignore. Alex began documenting every case. He created a database containing vehicle models, engine types, fuel stations, and reported problems. After several days of research, one fact became clear. Modern vehicles were extremely advanced, but that also made them more dependent on stable fuel characteristics. Turbocharged engines, precise fuel injection systems, and complex emission controls were designed for very specific conditions. Small changes could create unexpected reactions. Meanwhile, social media exploded. Videos appeared showing frustrated drivers standing next to broken down vehicles. Some videos showed luxury cars with open hoods. Others showed mechanics using diagnostic equipment while trying to understand unusual errors. The internet quickly created its own explanations. Some people claimed it was the beginning of a massive automotive disaster. Others said it was just online panic. Nobody knew the truth. Then, one evening, Alex received an invitation. A group of engineers wanted to meet privately and discuss the situation. Inside the conference room, specialists from different automotive fields gathered together. They compared repair reports, laboratory results, and technical data. For hours, they analyzed every possible explanation. Finally, one engineer displayed a graph showing the number of reported vehicle problems. The room became silent. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Something was happening, something affecting thousands of drivers. Alex looked at the data on the screen and realized one thing. This was no longer just a discussion about fuel. It had become an investigation, and the biggest question remained unanswered. What was actually happening inside the fuel tanks of millions of vehicles? To find the answer, they would have to follow a trail that would lead through laboratories, abandoned industrial facilities, and forgotten records from the past, because sometimes the most dangerous problems are not created by one mistake. They are created when old systems meet new technology. The meeting of engineers changed everything. Before that night, many specialists believed the situation was simply a series of unrelated incidents. Different cars, different regions, different drivers. But the collected data told another story. Something connected all these cases. The next morning, Alex Morozov arrived at an independent fuel research laboratory located outside the city. This was where samples from different regions were being analyzed. Small containers of gasoline arrived every day. Each one carried a different story. a sample from Moscow, a sample from the Ural region, a sample from Siberia, a sample from the Southern Territories. Thousands of kilometers separated these places, yet the complaints from drivers were surprisingly similar. Alex watched as laboratory technicians carefully examined each sample. The process was slow and precise. Every characteristic had to be measured, every difference had to be documented. After several hours, the first results appeared.
At first glance, most samples looked normal, but some showed noticeable differences. Certain batches had unstable characteristics compared with what modern engines were designed to handle. The scientists did not immediately make conclusions. They knew the situation was complicated. Fuel quality depended on many factors: production technology, transportation, storage conditions, and the final composition of each batch. A single number or label could not explain everything, but something was clearly different. It looks like several production systems are being mixed together, one of the chemists said quietly. Alex looked at the laboratory screen. Meaning? The scientist adjusted his glasses. Meaning that not every driver is receiving exactly the same fuel. That discovery explained one of the biggest mysteries. Why did some cars continue operating normally while others developed problems? The answer was becoming clearer. The issue was not simply the name of the fuel standard. It was the stability and consistency of the fuel itself. However, the investigation became more complicated when new reports arrived. A modern vehicle with very low mileage was brought into a repair shop. The owner said everything was normal until a recent refueling. After that, the engine started running unevenly. The diagnostic computer showed multiple errors. When mechanics inspected the fuel system, they discovered unusual deposits on several components. Alex sent the parts to the laboratory. The results showed that certain combinations of fuel characteristics and engine conditions could create problems for some vehicles. It was not a simple story. There was no single cause, no single person to blame. The situation was a chain reaction involving technology, production, and changing conditions. Meanwhile, the public reaction became more intense. News channels discussed the issue every day. Online forums were filled with arguments. Some people claimed modern cars were too fragile.
Others blamed the fuel industry. Some believed there was no problem at all. The truth became buried under thousands of opinions. Alex knew that the only way forward was to find the source. Where was the fuel coming from? Why did some regions experience more problems than others? Who controlled the supply chains? Together with his colleague Sergei, he began analyzing transportation routes and distribution networks. They compared thousands of pieces of information: fuel stations, delivery schedules, production locations, vehicle reports. Slowly, a pattern began to appear. Several problem areas were connected to the same supply routes. This discovery changed the entire investigation. The issue was not everywhere, it was concentrated. But before Alex could continue, he received another message. A new laboratory report had arrived. At the bottom of the document was a short note. Additional analysis required. Unknown factors detected. Alex stared at the words for a long time. The investigation had just entered a new stage. Because now the question was no longer only about what happened. The real question was, who knew about it before everyone else? The investigation entered a completely new phase. For Alex Morozov, the situation was no longer just a technical problem. It had become a complex puzzle involving production facilities, transportation networks, and decisions made far away from ordinary drivers. The first step was understanding where the fuel was coming from. Together with Sergei, Alex created a detailed map showing every reported case, every damaged vehicle, every fuel station, every region where drivers experienced problems. At first, the map looked chaotic. Thousands of dots appeared across the country. But after several days of analysis, a pattern slowly emerged. The incidents were not random. Many of them were connected to specific supply routes. Certain fuel shipments were appearing again and again in the reports. Look at this, Sergei said while pointing at the screen. A group of marked locations formed a clear line across the map. These stations are receiving fuel from the same distribution network. Alex leaned closer. The discovery changed everything. The problem was not affecting every driver equally. Some regions had almost no complaints. Others experienced a sudden increase in vehicle issues. The difference was the supply chain. To understand what was happening, Alex contacted people who worked in transportation and fuel logistics. One truck driver agreed to speak with him. The meeting took place at a quiet roadside cafe outside the city. The driver looked nervous. "I have been transporting fuel for 15 years, he said, but I have never seen so many changes happen so quickly." "What kind of changes?" The driver looked around before answering. "New routes, new suppliers, more urgent deliveries." "Did anyone explain why?" He shook his head. "Drivers are not told everything, we just follow instructions." This answer only created more questions. Why had the supply system changed so suddenly, and why were some fuel batches different from others? Alex continued searching. Eventually, he discovered information about older industrial facilities that had once played an important role in fuel production. Many of these facilities had been modernized over the years. Some were completely rebuilt, others were placed into reserve status. They were not active every day, but they still existed. The discovery reminded Alex of something important. Industrial systems are not changed overnight. Old equipment, old documents, and old procedures can remain hidden for decades. Meanwhile, laboratory specialists completed another round of testing. The results provided a clearer picture. The fuel itself was not a magical substance capable of destroying every engine instantly. The reality was far more complicated. Different vehicles reacted differently depending on engine design, maintenance condition, and the specific characteristics of each fuel batch. Modern engines were efficient and powerful, but they relied on precise conditions.
When those conditions changed, some vehicles became more vulnerable. The internet, however, continued spreading extreme stories. Some videos claimed that every modern engine would fail immediately. Others said the entire situation was fake. Alex watched these arguments and realized something important. The truth was somewhere between panic and denial. There was a real technical problem, but it was not the disaster people imagined. The next breakthrough came from an unexpected place. An old engineer named Victor contacted Alex. He claimed he had information about the early days of fuel modernization. According to Victor, some important documents had been forgotten after older production systems were replaced. Documents that could explain how the current situation had started. Alex agreed to meet him. The location was an abandoned industrial site outside the city. As Alex arrived, he saw massive storage tanks covered with rust. The place looked like a forgotten piece of history. Victor was waiting near an old administrative building. Without saying much, he opened the door and let Alex inside. Dust covered the shelves, old technical drawings filled the walls, and on one table lay a folder marked with a date from more than a decade ago. Victor placed it in front of Alex. "Everything you are looking for is inside." Alex opened the folder. The first page contained a sentence that immediately caught his attention. "Emergency fuel production procedures." For the first time, Alex realized that the answer might not be hidden in the future. It might have been waiting in the past all along. The old industrial building stood silent. Outside, the wind moved through abandoned storage tanks, creating a strange metallic sound. The place looked like a reminder of another era, a time when technology was different and production systems were built for completely different requirements. Inside the building, Alex Morozov followed Victor through a long corridor covered with dust. At the end of the hallway was a small room filled with old documents, technical drawings, and forgotten equipment. This was not just an abandoned office, it was an archive, a place where years of industrial history had been left behind. Victor placed several folders on the table. Before modern fuel standards became normal, these documents were part of the old production system, he explained. Alex carefully opened the first folder. Inside were technical plans, maintenance records, and reports from years earlier. The documents described how fuel production had changed over time. Older systems had gradually been replaced by newer technologies designed for cleaner and more stable fuel. But some emergency procedures remained. They were never meant to become a permanent solution. They existed only for extreme situations. These systems were created as a backup, Victor said. They were never designed to support an entire market. Alex looked at the documents again. A thought appeared in his mind. Maybe the problem was not simply about using older standards. Maybe the real danger came from trying to combine old production methods with modern expectations. Modern cars had become more advanced. Engines were smaller but more powerful. Fuel systems became more precise. Computer controls managed almost every part of vehicle operation. The technology had improved dramatically, but complexity also meant sensitivity. A small change in conditions could create unexpected consequences. Before Alex could ask another question, his phone rang. It was Sergey.
His voice sounded urgent. "Alex, you need to come back immediately. What happened? We found something important." When Alex returned to the laboratory, he saw a completely new analysis on the main screen. The team had compared thousands of vehicle reports with fuel distribution data. The results confirmed their suspicions. The problem was not connected to every fuel station. It was not affecting every driver. The cases were concentrated around specific supply chains. Different batches of fuel had different characteristics. This explained why one person could drive thousands of kilometers without problems, while another experienced issues after a short trip. The answer was not simple. It was a combination of factors: production conditions, transportation, storage, vehicle technology, maintenance. Everything played a role. The next report from the laboratory finally brought the investigation together. The lead researcher addressed the team. "We found the main cause." Everyone became silent.
The issue was not the fuel label itself. The problem was inconsistent quality between different batches. Some modern engines were simply more sensitive to these variations. Alex looked around the room. After weeks of rumors, fear and speculation, the truth was finally becoming clear. The internet had created a dramatic story about engines being destroyed instantly, but reality was more complicated. Technology rarely fails because of one single factor. It fails when many small problems appear at the same time. The investigation was almost complete. However, one question remained. Who allowed the situation to continue for so long before anyone noticed? The answer came the following day. A final report arrived from an independent review group. Inside were details about decisions, supply changes, and the challenges that had created the crisis. Alex opened the document. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. The crisis was not caused by one mistake. It was created by a chain of decisions. He continued reading, and with every page the story became clearer. The fuel crisis of 2026 was not just a story about gasoline. It was a story about how modern society depends on invisible systems. Systems that most people never think about until something goes wrong.
The final report arrived on a cold morning. For weeks, engineers, scientists, and independent experts had been searching for the truth behind the unexpected fuel problems of 2026. Now, all the information was finally gathered in one place. Alex Morozov entered the conference room where the investigation team was waiting. Everyone looked tired. They had spent countless hours analyzing data, inspecting vehicles, studying fuel samples, and trying to separate facts from rumors. On the large screen in front of them appeared the title of the final conclusion: Technical Investigation Report, Fuel Supply Situation 2026. The lead researcher began the presentation. "We analyzed thousands of fuel samples and vehicle reports from different regions. Our conclusion is clear. The situation was not caused by one single factor." The screen showed several categories: production, transportation, storage, vehicle technology. Each one played a role.
The investigation revealed that different fuel batches had different characteristics. Some were completely acceptable, others had variations that could create problems for certain modern vehicles. The most affected were cars with advanced fuel systems, turbocharged engines, and highly sensitive emission control technologies. But there was one important fact. The fuel standard itself was not a guarantee that every engine would immediately fail. The reality was much more complex. A modern vehicle was a combination of thousands of precise components working together. The engine control system constantly adjusted performance. Sensors monitored air, fuel, and emissions. Every part depended on stable conditions. When those conditions changed, some vehicles reacted more strongly than others. The public, however, had already created its own version of the story. Social media had transformed a complicated technical issue into a worldwide debate.
Some people believed every modern car was in danger. Others believed there was no problem at all. The truth was somewhere in the middle. There was a real challenge, but it was not the disaster that rumors had created. After the investigation became public, major changes followed. Fuel quality monitoring systems were improved, additional testing procedures were introduced, supply chains became more transparent, industrial facilities began upgrading their equipment. Slowly, the number of complaints decreased, repair shops became less crowded, drivers stopped checking their dashboards with fear every morning. The crisis was ending. Several months later, Alex returned to his workshop, the same place where the first strange cases had appeared. Cars were arriving again for normal maintenance. Oil changes, brake repairs, regular inspections. Life was returning to normal. One evening, Alex opened his old notebook. Inside were hundreds of pages from the investigation. At the very first page, he had written a sentence: "The biggest problems are not always caused by technology. Sometimes they are caused by forgetting how technology works." He looked at the words for a moment. The fuel crisis had taught many people an important lesson. Modern machines were powerful and efficient, but they depended on complex systems working correctly. Behind every simple action, pressing the gas pedal, starting an engine, driving to work, existed thousands of invisible processes. And when those processes changed, people immediately noticed the consequences. The events of 2026 became known as one of the most unusual industrial investigations of the decade, not because fuel destroyed the world, not because technology failed overnight, but because it showed how fragile the balance between old systems and new technology could be. The past and the future had collided.
And for a short moment, the entire world was forced to ask one important question. What happens when yesterday's solutions meet tomorrow's machines? The answer was simple. Progress requires not only new technology, it requires responsibility, preparation, and understanding. Because the future is not built by ignoring the past, it is built by learning from it.